All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tuleyome's July Nature and You lecture. My name is Jeff Ben. I'm the Education Associate at Tuleyome. If you don't know, Tuleyome is a small conservation nonprofit based in Woodland, California. Our mission is to engage in advocacy and active stewardship with diverse communities to conserve, enhance, restore, and enjoy the lands in the region. The region that we focus on is the northern inner coast range and neighboring areas in the Central Valley. We particularly focus on the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, which we recently helped lead the effort to expand. In addition to our public land advocacy work, we also do a variety of education programs, including K-12 field trips, natural history articles in our newsletter, and of course, this monthly lecture series. We also do a range of adventure programs, including hikes, trail building days, wildflower tours, and our youth boot bank, which provides free loans of hiking boots to kids. If you'd like to learn more about these or any of our other projects, you can do so on our website, tuleyome.org. All right, on to tonight's lecture. This lecture series is supported in part by donations from folks like you. So if you haven't already done so and are able to, we'd greatly appreciate a donation to support the good work that we do. We're very lucky to have Cathy Koehler with us tonight. Cathy is the Reserve Director at McLaughlin Reserve, which is managed by UC Davis as part of the UC Natural Reserve System. Cathy has a master's in behavioral ecology from the University of Calgary and has been with the UC Natural Reserve System since 2002. Tonight, she's going to be talking to us about the history, ecology, and ongoing research and other programs at McLaughlin Reserve. During the talk, we ask that you keep yourselves on mute, hang on to any questions till the end, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A with Cathy. All right, so with that, I will turn it over to Cathy. Thanks again for being here. I know we're all excited for your talk.
Hi, thanks for having me, and I'm going to go right into the talk and try to share this. So there we go. I'm going to try to share that. And am going to go into the slideshow. Okay. Can you see everything okay? Okay, cool. Okay, thank you for inviting me. My name, as you know, is Cathy Koehler, and I am with the University of California. Davis is the campus I'm associated with, but I'm part of I am the director of the McLaughlin Reserve, which is part of a statewide network of field stations. There's 42 now. It's the largest network of field stations associated within a university system. And the intention of the Natural Reserve System is to be able to provide places where people can go and do outdoor-oriented pursuits that are research, teaching, or public outreach-oriented from a perspective of an academic pursuit. But we also support public programs, and we also support non-university professionals doing research in a place like this. And the intention is to sample as many of the ecosystems of the diverse state of California as possible, so that there's an opportunity to really understand the ecology of California and its diverse ecosystems. So I've been with it for 24 years now. And on the left-hand side of this photo, you can see something called the Blue Ridge Berryessa Natural Area Conservation Partnership outline of what used to be a partnership that came together because of Homestake Mining Company, which I will cover, and a bunch of stakeholders, including the University of California's reserve system, in an area that was largely natural. And the stakeholders would get together once a month. They were the conservation partnership, and they would talk about conservation goals, actions, threats, those kinds of things. And it was actually at the BRBNA meetings, which I went to within a month of starting here, that I first met Bob Schneider. And he and various other stakeholders were very concerned with the conservation of the region. And the seeds of Tuleyome were building in Bob Schneider's head when I was going to those early BRBNA meetings when I first got here. So McLaughlin Reserve, conservation in the area, Tuleyome, we've got a long history that goes back. And you can see in the slide, the purple area is where the McLaughlin Reserve is, lying halfway between Clear Lake and Lake Berryessa. And it's at the intersection of Lake, Napa, and Yolo counties. All three counties are staggered. So the reserve system, as I said before, is there to meet the mission of the Natural Reserve System and the university to be producing and supporting research and teaching, as well as integrating into the community and doing public outreach. And that is what the McLaughlin Reserve does. And that is what I have been supporting for the 24 years that I've been here. And here are a few examples of what those activities could look like on the landscape or in the facilities. The reason for the McLaughlin Reserve being here is actually, however, associated with a combination of fantastic ecology and opportunities that were offered by a mining company. And this region has not been affected by the European impacts on California as the European era of immigrants started to influence California. Up until the mid-early 1800s, it hadn't been very much explored by people prospecting for settling. And the largest pulse of activity happened in the 1860s in conjunction with the gold rush and silver rush in the Sierra and in Nevada. There was a mineral rush across the state, and the mineral of discovery and therefore of mining in this area ended up being cinnabar, which is a sulfur and mercury compound that you can extract the mercury from, which is useful in extracting precious metals like gold and silver. And so the mercury rush in the 1860s brought in folks, and it brought in a lot of mining. And all of that now is the part of the mercury rush is very, very much a whisper on the landscape. But at the time, 1860s forward, it was very much very busy with mercury mining. And 4 of those of the mercury mines of the greater region actually occur on the reserve. The mercury mining and mercury use and various reasons to be mining mercury for precious metal extraction, for batteries, for mercury fulminate explosives, all of this settled down in the latter part of the 1900s as we began to understand that us putting mercury into the environment is not the best environmental health idea. And so the mercury mines that were around here lay languished for a while. And then in the late 1970s, with the price of gold skyrocketing, Homestake Mining Company based out of South Dakota came into areas like this to prospect for the gold that they knew that was deep down in these hot spring systems that had brought up the minerals like mercury, but also harbored other minerals deeper down, including gold. And so this was not a placer formation where you go out to the streams and you look for gold by panning for it. Not at all. This was a deep, deep mining effort that ended up happening here. They found in the late 70s a large body of gold here. They went into their phase of exploration, asking 3 counties for permits to do their operation, doing lots of stakeholder meetings, having to write a closures plan of what's going to happen after they do mining. And that closure plan identified that they wanted it to be a partnership. They wanted it to be an environmental research station after they finished with their gold mining. And so now starts in the 1985, the era of Homestake. They started their first scratching of the earth to start the mining process after having built 2 factories. They started that in 1985 is when they first started to actually start mining. And that was just shortly after Donald McLaughlin, who was an important person to them in the mining industry, had helped Homestake mining industry early in the 1900s and had been an important person in the geologic and mining communities, also a region of the UC. At one point in time, an adjunct professor of UC Berkeley. He was an important guy to them, and they named the mine in honor of him. And in 1985, they also started conversations with possible partners to make this a research station after they finished with the mining. And that research station was a discussion that really started to settle in with the University of California, because they were watching people from the University of California coming up here, not necessarily for the mining and observing that, but for the ecology of the area. So discussion started. Why are you coming up here? Would you be interested in having an environmental field station up here? A lot of positive sentiment occurred, and it turned into the Donald, not just Donald this time, but Donald and Sylvia McLaughlin Research Station, because Sylvia, his wife, was a big philanthropist in the Berkeley area. She started Save the Bay. In her 90s, she was sitting in trees on campus trying to prevent stadiums from being put up at Berkeley. And she was a great name to put on the reserve's name, because both of those people are very significant to both homestake and conservation and ecology in California. And so it became the Donald and Sylvia McLaughlin Reserve in 1993. A small little area on the property was given to the university, or not given, but allowed the university to work on it at their discretion, as well as possibilities for working across the property in coordination with an active mining operation. And the intention was in 2002 for the entire operation to shut down and then go into closure. And so that timeline for homestake, 85 to 2002, held firm. And in 2002, through a broader agreement, 7,000 acres dispersed across the landscape, centered first around the tailings pond as our western section, and centered around the pit, or the wildlands that comprise the UC Davis McLaughlin Reserve. The McLaughlin Reserve is just almost 7,200 acres now. And we watched both of the factories close down. So the configuration now, as I pointed out, is in two sections. This shows you that Homestake Mining Company, the lighter green, owns most of the property still, but there's a lease agreement for the university to manage it as a research station. The university owns the dark green section. A good chunk of that was donated to the university by Homestake Mining Company, but we've acquired a chunk of property in this the eastern edge of the western chunk. About 200 acres, and 20 of those acres were actually obtained by Tuleyome. And Tuleyome donated 20 acres to the university as part of the McLaughlin Reserve, what we call now the Varney parcel. We tend to refer to areas by the name of the previous owner. Just makes it kind of easy to know where you on the land you are. And I'll get back to Varney later on. But thank you, Bob, so much for working with us on that. It is a fantastic piece. So why would the university be interested in a partnership with a mining company? The university is in no way responsible for any of the reclamations the mining company is doing. They are beholden to their permit holders. They're beholden to the regulatory agencies. They're doing their thing, and they're doing their thing well. The university, however, it was willing to partner in a lease agreement on mining company land because Homestake Mining Company had gained a reputation for being actually a poster child of how to do environmentally forward-thinking mining in an era where environmental regulations were getting stricter and stricter. And one of their benefits was that they hired somebody who used to be a county planner, Ray Krause, to be their environmental manager, and he knew how concerned people would be about a mining company coming in. He knew the things that a mining company should be expected to do from a county standpoint in order to make sure that the operation is friendly to the communities that it's next to. And Ray did a fantastic job. He believed that stakeholders have a say and should be heard, and stakeholders should participate in their own well-being. in their own best interest. And so he very much started the conversation and with potential stakeholders who were the researchers who from UC Davis who were coming here. Why were those people coming here? Why was there even an interest in having a research station up in this area? Well, this slide shows you on the left-hand side two colors, gray and dark gray. And that is a very rough representation of the gross morphology of the geology in this area. It put into two very, very simplistic categories. And I'm not going to go into detail, so we can talk about that later if you wish. But we have geology here that comes either from the continent, erosion happens, it fills valleys, all that kind of stuff, or from an oceanic plate, which has a very different profile than a continent does. And at the very bottom of an oceanic plate, that's creeping along the edge of the continent, are heavy metals. And we call a chunk of ocean plate ophiolite. So we have what we call the Coast Range ophiolite here, in addition to the Great Valley sequence, which is from continental origin. But we also have the ultramafics, ultra high in magnesium and iron. And magnesium is, from a plant standpoint, a very challenging molecule. It's either too very, very rare and gets snapped up all the time, or when you're at McLaughlin or in serpentine landscapes, serpentine is a general word that we use to refer to altered or non-altered ultramafic rock. If you're in a serpentine landscape, there's way too much magnesium. And so what we have at McLaughlin is a landscape that's formed by these two very contrasting geologic bodies that support very different plant growth, or at least can support very different plant growth. Then if we looked at the other slide, we'll notice that there's even more geologic complexity if you zoom in. And on the bottom, it's actually the chemical complexity of an area that staggers a coarse continental oceanic geology divide, but it's so twisted and so complex, the chemistry, the magnesium presence compared to calcium, that really influences plants. So you've got geologic complexity in this area, and we were also in a Mediterranean climate. And you'll notice on this upper left-hand picture, it's not showing all the Mediterranean climates, but Mediterranean climates on the planet are amongst the biological hotspots of the planet. And so California's Mediterranean region is a biological hotspot of the globe. Nature Conservancy did an analysis of just the United States' biological hotspots, and they determined that where Lake, Napa, and Sonoma counties come together, in other words, the region of McLaughlin, we are in the hotspot of a hotspot. So the ecologists were pretty excited about a field station coming up into this area. So very good agreements were written. And in 2002, Paul and I arrived here to run the McLaughlin Reserve. We were initially co-directors. We've evolved over time, as everybody does over time in their careers. I'm now the director. He's the stewardship director. And how we see the land has changed tremendously over the last 24 years. So the McLaughlin Reserve has a lot of wildlife, all the wildlife that you would expect or hope for. A lot of it you don't see on a day-to-day basis, although the quail are really abundant these days. A lot of it you do see on a day-to-day basis if you spend a lot of time in what we call the serpentine, if we spend a lot of time in what we are loosely calling grasslands, and I'm going to change your mind on that. What really is the draw for research at McLaughlin, though, is not necessarily the wildlife, although pollinator ecology has really ramped up since halfway through Paul and my tenure here, as we really started to go down the road of, shall we say, restoration. I don't like that word. I might get into that, but that's what we use right now. What really is the crux for research, as well as a lot of the education and a lot of the geology courses that come out here, is the geologic complexity that begets the ecological complexity. And having soil complexity that's exposed to the same sun, the same rain, the same humidity, everything in the conditions of the environment are the same except for the soil in really close proximity to each other areas, That's what really drives a lot of the research. So in this picture, what we have is you can see a band of trees on the bottom. That's blue oak. They love continental soils. They do not like ocean-derived soils that have that high magnesium signal, the ultramafics. And so they're showing you that they're on continental origin. Well, the plant community behind them is serpentine chaparral. It grows. It's a specialized serpentine based chaparral community that grows on ultramafics. Look how close together they are. Think of being a research student who needs to look at different soils and how they influence plants. You got your plots 10 feet up the one of the divides or 10 feet below one of the divides, and you're totally different soil types. Everything else stays the same. Super powerful system for research. And that's really most of the research that occurs here occurs asking questions about soil, plant genetics, plant evolution. Part of it, of the attraction of the location too, is not just those tremendous interfaces that are so valuable if to support good research in the environment when it comes to understanding the influence of soils and the evolution of plants, but it's also just the variety that you see across the landscape. And all of that complexity, which is not just, two different soil types on one contact zone. You've seen the map there before. It's really actually pretty complex. You can walk across the landscape and walk 3 times to the same kind of community interspersed by different kinds of community. It's very, very mosaic out there. And one of the hallmarks of those ultramafic soils is that they support a lot of California's wildflowers, annual blooming wildflowers. Some of them are endemic to serpentine soils, but a lot of those wildflowers could be growing anywhere. And you'll see them in serpentine areas that have not yet been invaded by annual grasses, like the rest of California has, can have actually spectacular wildflowers. And it makes you wonder what the rest of California used to look like. So when Paul and I first got here, what we saw was oak woodland, chaparral, different flavors of chaparral, and grassland. And that grassland, depending on where you were in the grassland, you would find different species of annual grass. They're all annual grasses dominated by annual grasses from Europe and Asia. The continental soils tended to support a really thick thatch of just a massive annual grasses like the bromes and avena and goat grass as well. And then the ultramafic derived soils tended to support vast areas of goat grass as well as the other grasses in somewhat less dense fashion, but still invasion by those grasses into those areas had happened. And so we were seeing grassland all over the place with little pockets of pretty cool wildflowers. And over time, I learned that the grasslands of California are actually one of the most altered ecosystems of California. What we see now when we look across all of those hills of the Central Valley is golden hills that can go up in flame anytime between now and solidly into the rainy season. And so we sit on pins and needles looking at very dry grass or star thistle infested very dry grass. And in the springtime, it's very green. And so that is so much of what people see as California is that green and then that brown. And yeah, here and there, you might be able to find some pockets of wildflowers. So as we started to understand our grasslands and realize that there could possibly be something we could do to at least let the serpentine grasslands be a little bit more supporting serpentine flora and a little bit less supporting the annual grasses. And how do we start taking those annual grasses out? So we started learning a little bit. And we came across Rich Minnick's book from UC Riverside, where he was arguing that really the poor records that were kept when the European era started in California, those records, for even not being too detailed, were strongly suggesting that our assumption that California was grassland and that without the annual grasses, it would have been native bunch grasses, but it would have been grassland. He argued, and persuasively, that much of California was actually wildflower land. And those judgment calls were oftentimes made by padres who were looking for pasture for their cows. So the European era came with a seeking opportunities for cows, because we rely on cows now. And if the opportunity to grow cows on it isn't there, then maybe we can change it so that it can grow cows. So those Golden Hills of California are a legacy of the cow. So when we got to McLaughlin, maybe not so much for the cow, because this area was really heavily affected by European influences way later, into the mid 1800s, if not later. But we still have a landscape of annual grasses. And we arrived, Paul and I, into grassland amidst those woody plant communities. So we started to look into what the variability was in these grasslands and what actions we could take to address it. Everybody here is familiar with this picture right here. This is your typical California, owned by Avena and non-native annual bromes, star thistle. And one would think that some of California's wonderful diverse flora would have been in those areas that are now dominated by annual grass. And so if we look at California's flora, we find actually that a third of California's flora can tolerate serpentine, non-serpentine. It doesn't really care. It can do both kinds. It's evolved having to deal with high levels of magnesium in some soils and less high and low levels of magnesium in other soils. Very robustly adjustable flora, a third of it, right? So in our serpentine meadows, where we are seeing more of what used to be the wildflowers in California, we can assume that most of those probably would have occurred in the now dominated by annual grassland. And so McLaughlin was actually a really cool place to start thinking about what this must have looked like in the past. The upper right-hand picture is a classic one where you're seeing the blue oaks on regular continental soils. What's growing under and adjacent to the blue oaks on that regular continental soil is primarily invasive non-native grasses and invasive forbs like star thistle, and a modicum of non-native species that aren't invasive, but the system is dominated by the invasives. In the forefront, you see the first year of treatment on a serpentine meadow where we ran fire through it. Now you can see wildflower fields. And now you can wonder, how can we make these wildflower fields be the winners of the land instead of the losers to the annual grasses? So not only is this a complex geologic area for people to do research in, but it's also a complex geologic and biodiverse area for us to learn how to do stewardship. Yes. So now I'm going to go into just a quick bunch of shots on what has happened over the last 20 years as we've moved through our learning, our experience, our shifts in perspective, our ability to become stewards of the land. We've taken expanses dominated by non-native invasive grasses. Don't need to discuss what grass was where. The landscape was owned by grass. And we've turned it into what I've been calling prairie or meadow, but now I learned that the Department of Fish and Wildlife is using the words flower fields. So I'll refer to it as flower fields. And shockingly to me, the Department of Fish and Wildlife considers healthy, high quality flower fields to be grasslands with 10% of their flora being the wildflowers. And I'm like, 10%? Really? So we have striven for dozens of acres out here for near 100%. And we've been successful, and we're pretty stoked about it. And we have provided some very cool research opportunities for people. And I struggle with how to talk about what it is that the stewardship is about. And it comes down to the common Hollywood words of, I'll be back. You have to be back. You have to be back on an annual basis. You have to be back on a seasonal basis, and you have to rotate through an area several times in the season. You need to be there to be a steward of the land and make sure that your goals, biodiversity of the native flora, doing what it wants to do. I'm not going to tell it where to go, doing what it wants to do. And it's the one that gets to set seed and the invasive species don't. So we have tools. We have used wildfire and not wildfire. We have used prescribed fire. That's evolved. We are now doing a lot more prescribed fire here. We are supporting research projects with prescribed fire and understanding things like frequency, when to use it, how to use it, why to use it. It's not just a simple let's put good fire on the landscape and good things will happen. No, it's more complex than that. We also, in order to reduce the thatch, is one of the uses of the wildfire. We also use mechanical means to reduce thatch. We've done research, lower left, on control methods. We do judiciously use herbicides. In some areas, there's a grass-specific herbicide that does not harm most of the native grasses, pretty much all of the native bunch grasses, and most of them are native bunch grasses. And we understand its interactions with various grasses, and it is a very effective eliminator of non-native annual invasive grasses. So we use that judiciously at the start of a management area, but the centerpiece, that is the most powerful tool we have, is a person going out there, observing and making decisions about what to remove so that the things that are to be encouraged can have a higher level of success. So what have we done? This piece right here is Varney. This is the area that Bob and Tuleyome helped us protect. They donated this parcel to the McLaughlin Reserve. We had started doing management before Tuleyome had the opportunity to speak to the sellers who inherited the Varney parcel from their relatives. We had started to remove the bagoat grass, which was pretty much 100% over a good chunk of Varney. And the picture on the right is a reasonably good representation of what it looks like year by year now. This is a pretty satisfying result. The wildflower fields, these are not homogeneous across the landscape. They vary across the landscape along with the heterogeneity of the soil. And so once you get them an opportunity to be where they want to be and reproduce in the way that they need to, not in the presence of disproportionately influencing non-native invasive species, you really get to see that variability. And that variability is such a cool tool for a lot of researchers looking at pollination biology and the preservation of native pollinators to have access to. So back down to this classic photo. So I've shown you some examples of the serpentine landscape. What about the non-serpentine, the continental stuff? We're starting to chip away at this. Again, I draw your attention to this little oak grove back here and the fact that it's a homogeneous green back there. That little oak grove is now featured down below. And we have been working with our management techniques of annual, seasonal, repeatedly throughout the season, using the tools that we have to prevent the non-native invasives from setting seed and allowing the natives to set seed. We've been doing this for a little bit like 2 decades, but really seriously for 15 years. And you can see now in a summer picture, we're no longer green grass that goes yellow. The yellow grass we've left under the canopy of the oaks, but you'll see on the sides of the oaks that there is a herbaceous community. It's not a grassland. It's an herbaceous community that looks a lot like the stuff in the foreground, the stuff that's on serpentine. Remember that? And what we have this time of year is we don't have all the spectacular wildflowers. Those are springtime guys. Now, the landscape is owned by a bunch of native species, if you give them a chance, that are summer flowerers. They provide pollination opportunities in the summertime. Pollinators are quite well known to not like grass that is dry and crispy. And so these summer plants are these hardy little things that are dominated primarily by the tar plant group. Some people call them tar weeds. I will not call them weeds; they're plants. And a handful of other things that when summer is their time of year, we have serpentine seeps here that are flowering tremendously right now. Very specialized species in those seepy, slightly moist areas. Part of that biodiversity, right? And the rest of areas that we haven't been working on, you can see on the right, are full of the grass. And in this picture that I just popped up, you can see our management line. You can see those two oak groves are nested in yellow, but then you can see that greenish haze of that herbaceous community coming along behind those oak groves. And then in the foreground, you see this sharp division, which is actually a road. Easy, easy barrier for me to manage on one side and not on the other, and start to see what the difference land stewardship can make. And so now we can start asking the question of, well, what's supposed to be under the oak canopy? And so we've started chipping into that a little bit too. Again, on the left is the scruffiness with the highly flammable non-native annual thatch. And on the right-hand side, you have native bunch grasses, you have native gum plants, you have the tar plants, you have bird's bill, which is favored by the bees. You have a bunch of native plants. Maybe this is what it's supposed to look like in the understory of the oaks. We're trying to figure that one out. We're letting the plants tell us what they want to do. And this dividing line is that management line along the road I was talking about. And the most amazing thing that we discovered when the wildfires came through this area twice is that the native vegetation is way less volatile and way less flammable than the vegetation of California that is owned by non-native annual grasses. So we talk a lot about fire these days. Are we going to start trying to simulate, what's the right word, what the Native Americans did in the past? They were working with a different ecosystem than what we have today. And we have to recognize that they spent time managing the land. They didn't just spend time burning the land. They managed the land as well. If we put fire on the land without further thinking about other actions that we should take, are we going to get a satisfactory result where we all of a sudden have miraculously native-dominated ecosystems? Something to think about. So, if in pre-contact California, people were, according to the book that I just showed you in the previous slide, go back to it, Kat Anderson's Tending the Wild, which is based on just exhaustive interviews with Native American folk. These folks engaged in annually, seasonally, all the time, an unremitting labor of generations of Native people supporting, doing labor on the land to support their life and the life of the land. In modern times, I would argue we might still consider that the land needs unremitting labor of us to support healthy natural land and healthy human lives. And so if we believe that we want healthy natural lands, we need to commit to becoming people who know the land, know the species, know actions to take, can look at some land and think about things that they can do in order to make things better for biodiversity, reduction of fire, health of people on a landscape. So, and the last thing is, I repeat, fire on the land without restorative stewardship, partnering with it, is potentially going to erode the native biota, not necessarily make any or make no difference whatsoever to the land that is burned. So that's pretty much what I've learned in 24 years here at McLaughlin. I came here knowing a lot from some wildlife project experience, a lot from book learning at university level, And then I started to learn McLaughlin from McLaughlin by spending time on the land. And I have learned that there's a lot that we can do individually to be supportive of a healthier California with healthier natural lands and healthier environment for people by becoming individually involved in stewardship, which requires dedication and has tremendous rewards. Okay, that's my lecture.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks, Cathy. That was an awesome lecture. If folks have questions, two options for you. You can either raise your hand and then I'll call on folks and you can unmute yourself and ask that way. Or you can relay questions in the chat and then I can pass those along to Cathy. So we've got a few questions already. So Narisa is asking if the reserve has actively partnered with any indigenous communities on some of the land stewardship projects.
We have. We are have been involved with, do you know Terra, Tribal Eco Restoration Alliance? They are out of the Robinson Rancheria area up in Upper Lake. And we've done trainings with them. We have done prescribed fire with them, both at Terra events, and Terra has come to our events. So I have been very happy to be able to work with folks from Terra on some of our prescribed fire. And we have presented a FFT2 training that Terra had some trainers participate in that presentation. It was a typical firefighter training, but it had an emphasis on using fire for restoration. So we've done that. And I am in the process of getting to know the tribe that was the primary folk to use the area in the western section of the reserve. I believe the folks over in Cache Creek Dokoyete are the ones who had some activities on the eastern section of the reserve down by the reservoir. Most of our activities happens in association with the serpentine soils here in the western section of the reserve. And it was the Middletown Band of Pomo who were the folks who would seasonally come up into this area, family camps up here. I'm just getting to know those folks, and I'm really looking forward to having discussions about the ecology of the land and the importance of it to whoever is now spending time on it and being given the job of being a caretaker of it and being given the job of being respectful of the land. And so I hope to learn an awful lot about this area from them and not just the stuff I've learned from reading books.
Great. Daria?
Hello. I have a question that is about cows. And so much. Well, first of all, actually, I want to say thank you. This was such a brilliant presentation and so wonderful and educational, and also really, really inspiring and positive for me to see. So I'm very thankful. Thank you. And my question is about cows because so much of the discussion that I've personally been heard, and that has to do with sort of the area in which I work and, conferences that I've been to and things, but so much of the conversation around restoring native, plants and specifically native grasses and wildflowers to California has involved cows and using cows as a way to mow down, the invasive grasses so that, or at least that's what I've heard is using cows as a way to mow down the invasive grasses so that the natives have a chance to actually make it to the top and flower and produce seed and spread, etc. And I'm wondering, I've always, I'm not myself, um, I'm not a plant scientist, and so I've always found that I guess a bit of a sketchy. I don't know. So I'm wondering what you have to say about it. I'm seeing that you didn't use cows in any way in your methods, and
Right.
so I'm curious.
Well, I would like to I have a toolbox with a lot of things in it, and introduced you to some of those things. And I wouldn't mind having a toolbox with cows in it. Um, if I could do some of that initial breaking down of the thatch, cleaning up a little bit, because cows like to eat grass, right? And so
Yeah,
if I put a
yeah,
cow on a grass infested spot, one can predict there's going to be a little bit less grass per cow, because of the cow. And so, yeah, cows could be a tool in your toolbox. And for a lot of people, livestock, be it goats, sheep, cows, is an
mhm,
automatic because they're like, well, they eat the stuff that you're trying to get rid of. Well, yes, this is true, but we don't have. I mean, nobody's come to me and offered to manage cows for my restoration work. I don't have
yeah,
access to the cows, right? And so, should the land look like cow food if just because I don't have access to cows? And
right,
so that's the first piece is, um, yeah, sure. Try using cows, try using other livestock to bring down the grass. But recognize that the cows will have their favorite amongst the native species that they will eat, and they will eat it away, and you will no longer have it in the soil. So there are things that they will eat, and you will have disappearing in a pasture if you have
right.
enough cows there to make that impact. Um, Also, Susan Harrison from UC Davis has done some work where she's looked at um, harsh soils, intermediately harsh soils, so the chemistry and the texture of the soil is kind of harsh, but not as harsh as the harsh soils, and then more benign soils. And what she has found in the benign soils, she was doing it this in serpentine, non-serpentine gradients. And what she found was that on the benign soils, the grazing didn't really increase the biodiversity. Yeah, it kind of thinned the grass out a little bit. So those species that could tolerate the presence of the cows, probably because the cows didn't eat them, those species could actually have some pretty good years depending on the level of grazing. But the biodiversity that that area is supposed to be supporting is not really there because the cows will eat the things that are yummy and tasty, right? So you'll have the stuff that the cows are leaving behind for flowering. On the really harsh soils, cow grazing doesn't do anything because there's just nothing for cows to eat. But on the
Right.
intermediate soils, you can actually get a higher level of response because it's a mix of harsh and not so harsh. And in the harsher areas that the cows don't go to, there will be an opportunity for more diversity of native plants. And so those grazing conditions actually can um, increase the native biodiversity within a pasture, but those conditions are probably not prominently represented across grazing lands. And so,
Got it.
yeah, under some conditions, cow grazing can actually boost biodiversity. And as I discussed, in some areas, you might have really nice flowering lupins or something like that because the cows were eating the grass. But it's not a restoration tool. I don't like the word restoration because it implies in so many people's minds, it implies that when you have done a project, you've restored it. You can restore a house, you can restore a car, but you still have to maintain it after you restored it.
Right.
In an ecosystem, you can't restore an ecosystem. You can allow native species of that ecosystem to govern the landscape, but it's their job. You don't say who goes where. And so I don't like the word restoration, so rehabilitation I've entertained. But as a restoration tool, cows are only one tool. They're not going to do the job for you, and they might ruin the job for you. And so I can't put cows in the areas that I've restored. There's nothing for them to eat. They'll trample it, and it'll be an insult to the area because there's nothing for them to
Yes.
eat there. And so,
Thank
yeah,
you.
It needs to be taken with a grain of salt and it needs to be thought about carefully. And all these tools are legitimate tools. They just need to be deployed properly.
Right. Thank you so much. I appreciate this so much.
All right. I've got a few more questions in the chat. So, Agamemnon, seems like someone may have seen the Odyssey recently, has asked, are there any endemics that are exclusive to the preserve?
Um, no. There even things like regionally, there's the Boggs Lake Gradiola. It's not just at Boggs Lake. So the little geographic area of the reserve, no, it does not have a species that only occurs here. But we have a large assemblage of species that only occur regionally in very small populations. And so the work that we've done has provided opportunities for those species to flourish. And so we have really, really fantastic populations of high listed CNPS, um, not threatened in that they are, their well being is threatened, but just rare because of limited distributions, endemics.
Do you have a particular favorite of those? One you look for every spring?
Well, I don't have to look for them. They shout at me as I go by. Um, Always cute and fun to see is this poor little thing called Castanea rubicundula. Its unfortunate common name is cream sacks. So
Hmm.
I always cringe at common names. So I'm big into the science names. The the late season Clarkia gracilis
Hmm.
is I mean it just owns the landscape in the springtime. It's the swaths of pink are tremendous. And we have lately had lots of aphyllons, these parasites, these root parasites, showing up because their hosts are becoming more abundant. So that's kind of cool. What was there is one that I am particularly fond of and I can't think of right now. And if I come up with it, I'll let you know. But there's a lot of spectacular, lovely stuff. And we have wildflower walks and we help
Hmm.
botanists sometimes introduce them to some species that they've always wanted to see. So we provide
Awesome.
opportunities for botanists who are interested.
Great. So another question from the chat. Kate has noticed that some outcrops of serpentine rock in Lake County appear to be virtually void of plant life. Can you explain what might be going on with that?
These, I think, are commonly referred to as serpentine barrens. And it's a combination of, I think, slope as well as just kind of broken rock, not that much soil. And the angle, I mean, the angle usually has a lot to do with it. And from a distance, they definitely, and for most of the year, they definitely will look pretty much devoid of plant life. But in the springtime, some of these serpentine barren places can support wildflowers that are specialists on serpentine barrens. And so in the BLM area next to us, the Knoxville Recreation Area, there's some really nice barrens that have Streptanthus kalagi, I think it is. Um, it's a serpentine barrens Streptanthus. There's a serpentine barren Collinsia. There's quite a few serpentine barren plants that we can find on those serpentine barrens in the BLM. McLaughlin itself doesn't have serpentine barrens. The slope is not quite as steep, and so ours tend to be more vegetated by more rocky hill loving serpentine species. So hope that helps.
Narisa is asking if there are any large ungulates on the reserve, like i.e. Tule elk, or are there animals that used to be on the land in larger numbers that influence the ecology?
So we I truly believe we should have more deer. I don't know what kind of censuses are done by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and how decisions are made with respect to, to giving a break 1 year for hunting season and then opening it up again. I don't know exactly what the dynamics are on that, but it seems to me that we could have more deer. Is this an area that would have Tule elk? I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, the Tule elk that we have nearby, 3 herds, I think it is, along Highway 20 and then down into Highway 16, roughly in the area where it joins 20. We have Tule elk wander through here every now and then, one or even two, and they don't settle down. I think they're looking for other Tule elk. So if we actually had a Tule elk herd established here with the help of Fish and Wildlife, those wanderers might stop and join that herd. So I don't know. I don't know if we would have had Tule elk here. I need to learn more about the wildlife that was essential to the people who were here pre-European use, and what that was. It wouldn't have been buffalo. It would have been more the browsing crowd, not the grass eating crowd, because it's not a grassy area. It has a grass component, but it's not dominated by grasses. So yeah, we have the deer and we have the pseudo ungulate. It's not an ungulate. We have, the next level down on the herbivores is the jackrabbit, and that's very abundant. So.
Gotcha. All right. Sticking with the large hoofed animal theme, coming back to thinking about using cattle as management tools, Julia is wondering what the impact of livestock might be on surface hydrology, soil compaction, other soil properties. Would they have a negative impact on those things?
So this is not an area that I'm very well versed in, but I do know that I've watched areas recover from damage similar to the damage that cows can do when they're let into some of these soils when it's wet. And so, I mean, those hooves are suction cups. They really create little mini craters that change the hydrology, because now all of a sudden these little catchment puddles, right? So it changes how the water pools versus soaks into the landscape. In some of these areas, I think that if there weren't fences and you threw the cows out here, they wouldn't actually go into some of those clay areas, because it's just unpleasant to walk across when it's wet, and there's not really much to eat for them, because it's more a bunch of wildflowers that are not really quite up the alley of this kind of stuff that cows have evolved to be interacting with. And so the impacts of the livestock would be interesting to really observe in an area where there are no constraints, and something to seriously consider when you force animals to be on a piece of land in density. So yeah, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm sure that there are influences.
Mari is wondering if the parts of the reserve that are owned by Homestake, are those open to folks that are staying at the research station, or are parts of that closed off?
The entire reserve is available for access by people who get approved to do projects out here, or people who use the place. The mining company is doing reclamation still in some spots. So those areas that they're doing reclamation in, I do not send people there. I do not let people there. It's Homestake's area of work, and I don't send people into their work area. And so Homestake's presence influences the ability for people to access certain parts of the reserve, just because we have to work with our partner and make sure that we don't interfere with each other. But those areas that that's the university has a license over, which is the majority of the property, to manage it as a research station. Everybody has the ability to access it for approved reasons. And even some of the areas that Homestake Mining Company retains liability over, and the university has to ask for secondary levels of permission for somebody to use it. Even those areas can be used. We call those excluded areas because they're excluded from full and open access. But if somebody wants to look at a reclaimed area and ask questions about the plants that are growing in the reclaimed area, for example, and it's not an area that Homestake is working in, there's a process for being able to use one of those areas in studies as well. So this is again kind of making the conversation about the approved research and teaching that happen here. And from the perspective of public outreach, there's a lot of guided public outreach. And if somebody's helping me with stewardship, they would be working on the stewardship in the areas where the stewardship is happening. Maybe it's in disparate parts of the reserve, but mostly it happens in the western section.
Got it. Daria's wondering if you are sharing your very successful restoration methods with other groups that are stewarding other properties.
We are. We have worked quite a bit with the Napa Land Trust, and they've talked with us a lot about the stewardship approaches that might work best for their Misamer Snell Valley Preserve, which is a serpentine preserve. I've worked with some local groups in Lake County and with the various representatives. So the CDFW group folks from Region 2 and the BLM folks out of the Ukiah office. We're in close contact with those folks and talk about our work here. And the lake, I work with the Lake County Land Trust. I'm also a board member of them on their board on discussions with how the land trust is trying to move forward in doing substantial stewardship on its lands. So yeah, and I would love to talk with more people and have more people come out here and understand what we're doing so that they can then think about doing similar things elsewhere.
Awesome. So I had one question myself. So thinking about as you're doing these restoration projects, are you using seed at all, or are you just knocking back the invasive plants and letting the plants that are already there produce seeds and kind of move into the space that's opened up? What's your approach there?
All the above. So the primary thing that we've done, and we learned as we started to describe it to people, we learned, hey, you're doing the Bradley method. And we're doing the Bradley method? No, we're just preventing the non-native invasives from setting seed and allowing the natives to set seed. And so that method was a little book was published by the Bradley sisters. They were from Australia, and they had a little book that said that they called "Bringing Back the Bush," and they just kind of it's intuitive. It's intuitive, right? If you don't like something, if it's causing harm, you prevent it from causing harm, and you help along the others. So our approach has been, and that was also the one outlined by the Bradley sisters. Choose the areas where you still see a modicum of the species that you're hoping to help. And so if you choose an area where you still see some of those and start cleaning that up, then you can start moving out in circles, in little ripples from that area and allow them to spread out into it. So that method is the let them do it. Let them multiply, let them sort it out, let them set seed. And you're there to just mop up the seed bank year after year after year of the invasives. But we have had some reconstruction projects where we had to completely alter a hill and it was denuded. We collected seeds from nearby areas where we've been doing our tending restoration. We collected seeds from nearby and threw it into those areas. And now that location, every year, at least 3 times a year. In the springtime, in the growing season, we go in there and we remove the invasive species and let the progeny of what we seeded there be the ones who are successful. And other things have spread in and moved because it's adjacent to a natural area that we've taken care of. So we've done both approaches, and both approaches, no matter how you do it, you have to commit to and be there for it on a regular basis. That's the magic answer.
Excellent. All right. Does anyone have any other questions for Cathy? While you're pondering on that, I'll quickly plug our next lecture. It'll be coming up in August. I'm not up on the website yet. I'm still finalizing the details, but that one is going to be on vernal pools, which are another very special California ecosystem. So keep an eye out on the website. That should be getting posted here in the next week or so. And then our September talk is posted. That one will be on conservation programs at Conaway Ranch. So that's another one that's going to be looking at land stewardship practices, albeit in a very different context. All right, Daria?
Yeah, I guess I do have one more question. I guess I'm wondering, you know, how scalable do you feel that your methods are? You've mentioned your partnership with CDFW, and are they considering applying your methods on larger scales? I guess I'm wondering what is the future here when we're thinking about California as a state and quote unquote as restoring, the ecosystem of California.
Well, with CDFW, it's more that I think they appreciate the work that we have done out here and are helping us acquire some of the private lands that we've tended in agreement by the landowners to include because of their spectacular serpentine landscapes, in addition to those on the reserve. And so the CDFW is we're turning to them to help protect those lands and add them to the reserve to make the stewardship that we've subjected them to something that's permanently part of the entire landscape of the reserve and available for future learning and teaching. So CDFW, whether or not they are partners on implementing some of these techniques, I would like to continue that conversation. I've knocked on a couple of doors, and who knows? Hopefully, some conversations will produce some fun collaborations or at least thought exercises before I vanish from the planet. So what was
I guess scalable and
yes.
scalability.
So the scalability is all depending on the number of people involved. I mean, what we've done is primarily driven by 2 people with some seasonal help. And
Wow.
so that's a lot. But on
Yeah.
the scale of California, it's just a blip. But I do
Yes.
know that there are other blips out there that are doing the same things. I met a lovely man who's doing exactly the same thing up on Mount Diablo. And so there are small clusters of people across the landscape who are doing this. It is scalable if they get help. Because if you take an area and there's some people who are willing to tackle that area, it doesn't take that many people to do a good job on a small scale. And if we allow ourselves the realistic expectation of taking decades, what can this all look like in 200 years? And if you allow yourself the luxury of thinking long term instead of how can we make this happen tomorrow all over the place, I think things will grow together. So
Yeah.
So we need to think long term, and we give lip service to those concepts of long terms. We label detergent seventh generation because there was an Indian philosophy about taking care of things for the seventh generation down the row. I mean, we don't think that way though. We put it on our laundry detergent, but we don't really act that way. And when it comes
Yeah,
to land stewardship, we should. We really should.
I agree. Can I ask another question that's related, or I can also come back around? But
If there's
um,
nobody
You,
else.
you can go for it, Daria.
oh, thank you. So I guess to continue on what you were just saying about you know, it just takes people. I don't know. Um, have you thought about I guess involving more of the community in any of these efforts, or do you see that as a possibility in the future, having a I guess an organized community effort to restore certain landscapes? Is that a possibility in your mind?
Um, I'm a little distant from what you might call a community. I'm a little bit out in the Boonvilles. And so people should be doing this in their communities. And so if people could start doing this in communities because people live there and they'll be able to wander through the natural areas and make quick decisions that help the health of it on their morning walks. Um, we could go huge distances if people started doing this in their communities. And we could start addressing wildland urban interface fire problems if people did this in their communities. How do you start to get people to do this in the communities is what I'm struggling with right now. And um, I I'm talking a lot about it and hoping that at some point in time somebody becomes a partner with me because I can't do it all myself um, to start some sort of an apprenticeship program where people are trained for a 3 year cycle in natural lands, for example, at the
Hmm.
McLaughlin Reserve. And after 3 years of apprenticing, can go into communities and start being leaders there. And so, how to fund people to do that, how to pay people a living
Right.
wage to be those
Yes.
stewards, that's the biggest nut to crack.
Yeah. It would be a great service. Um, but yeah, funding.
Yep. Yep. So maybe
Yeah.
philanthropy. Maybe we have to turn this to the philanthropists. Maybe there's somebody out there who's willing to set up a few tremendous endowments to pay people's wages.
Be great. Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking questions.
Yeah. Another of Tuleyomy's projects is the Woodland Regional Park Preserve. And there are several folks there that have been doing this sort of work for quite a few years. And Tuleyome actually has a horticultural internship program for undergraduates to come and learn from these folks that have been working on rehabilitating the land for a number of years now. So we are hiring those interns now. So if anyone's a college student on the call, make sure to head over to our website and check that out.
Well, thank you for having me, Jeff.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for coming out. Thanks to everyone for coming out for the talk and sticking around for the Q&A. And I hope to see you in August for our talk on vernal pools.